Hey everyone, welcome back to the Checkered Sky channel where we dive into true crime stories. Today, we're diving into a heartbreaking story from South London. A story of a young woman with big dreams, caught in a web of toxic control and missed chances. Her name was Katrina Makanova, a 17-year-old who wanted to become a beautician. But in 2018, her life ended in a way that shocked her family, her community, and even those meant to protect her. What happened to Katrina? How did a relationship that started with a simple Instagram message spiral into tragedy? And why did the system fail her? Let's unravel the story, piece by piece, starting with a connection that seemed innocent, but hid a darker truth. Katrina Makanova was just 15 when she met Oluwase Dada in 2016. She was a shy, creative teenager, born to Czech parents in London, with a passion for makeup and dreams of turning it into a career. Her brother Julius later described her as someone who lit up a room, always sketching new designs or practicing her craft. That year, a message on Instagram changed everything. Oluwase, who went by the nickname Capone, was 19, charming, and confident. To Katrina, he was exciting, a guy who seemed to notice her in a way others didn't. They started talking, then dating, and for a while, it felt like a typical teenage romance. But things shifted. By 2018, Katrina was 17, and the relationship had turned sour. Oluwase wasn't the guy she thought he was. He had a criminal past tied to drug dealing and a temper that scared her. Her brother noticed she was quieter, more withdrawn. Friends saw bruises she tried to hide. Oluwase's behavior became controlling. He'd demand to know where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. Katrina wanted out, but leaving wasn't easy. She started reaching out for help, hoping someone would step in before things got worse. What she didn't know was how many times her pleas would go unanswered. Katrina's attempts to escape her toxic relationship with Oluwase Dada were marked by a series of desperate pleas to the Metropolitan Police between February and June 2018. Over those 5 months, she reported at least 5 incidents, each one a clear signal of escalating danger. The first call came in February, when Katrina told officers that Oluwase had threatened her with a knife during an argument at his flat in Camberwell. She described how he'd held the blade close, his voice low and menacing, demanding she stop talking to other people. The police logged the incident, but didn't pursue it further. No arrests, no follow-up. Katrina, shaken but determined, kept reaching out. In March, she reported another altercation. Oluwase had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks, accusing her of disrespecting him. She told officers she felt trapped, that his behavior was getting worse. Again, the response was minimal. The officers who took her statement didn't conduct a formal risk assessment, a critical step meant to evaluate the threat level and protect victims of potential domestic abuse. By April, another incident. Oluwase had followed her to a friend's house, banging on the door and shouting threats. Katrina's friends urged her to call the police again, and she did, but the officers treated it as a one-off, not part of a pattern. May brought more distress. Katrina reported Oluwase throwing a drink over her in public, humiliating her in front of strangers. She told the police she was scared to be alone with him, that his temper was unpredictable. The final documented call came on June 26, 2018, after another public incident where Oluwase poured a drink over Katrina during an argument. She begged for help, saying she didn't feel safe. Yet, the police failed to connect the dots. Oluwase's criminal history, his ties to drug dealing and local gangs, his nickname Capone signaling his reputation, wasn't properly investigated. No one flagged him as a repeat offender who posed a serious risk. The Metropolitan Police's Child Protection Unit, meant to safeguard vulnerable young people like Katrina, was stretched thin. Officers were juggling too many cases, and Katrina's reports slipped through the cracks. By the time Katrina made her last call, she was running out of options and time. Her family noticed her growing fear, the way she'd check her phone nervously or avoid certain streets in Camberwell. She was trying to break free, but the system wasn't listening. Just weeks later, her decision to confront Oluwase one last time would lead to a devastating outcome. On July 11, 2018, Katrina made a choice that showed her strength. She told her family she was done with Oluwase Dada. At 17, she'd had enough of his control, his outbursts, and the fear that had defined their relationship for months. Her brother Julius later said she seemed resolute, ready to reclaim her life. The next day, July 12th, she headed to Oluwase's apartment block on Brisbane Street in Camberwell, South London. We don't know her exact words or plan, but it's likely she wanted to end things face to face, to make it clear she was moving on. What happened in that apartment block was a tragedy, born of chaos. Katrina and Oluwase met in a communal area of the building, and their conversation quickly turned heated. Witnesses later described raised voices, the kind of argument that echoed through the halls. The situation escalated into a physical struggle. Katrina had brought a kitchen knife in her handbag, a 19.5-centimeter blade, possibly carried out of fear given Oluwase's history of threats. During the scuffle, accounts differ on whether Katrina stumbled or was pushed, but the result was catastrophic. She fell onto her handbag, and the knife inside pierced through the fabric, striking her in the chest. Oluwase's reaction was immediate, but futile. He tried to stop the bleeding, pressing his hands against the wound and calling for help. Paramedics and police arrived quickly at the scene, but Katrina's injury was too severe. She died there, in the dim light of the apartment block, surrounded by strangers. The police arrested Oluwase on suspicion of murder, cuffing him as they pieced together the chaotic scene. Forensic teams examined the knife, confirming it came from Katrina's bag, not Oluwase's possession. Witnesses corroborated that the struggle was mutual, with no evidence that Oluwase had wielded the weapon. The investigation revealed a complex picture. The knife was Katrina's, possibly a desperate measure to protect herself, but the fall was accidental. Oluwase's role in the struggle couldn't be ignored, but it didn't meet the legal threshold for murder. The case was reclassified as manslaughter, a charge that acknowledged his responsibility without intent to kill. As the police built their case, Katrina's family grappled with grief and anger, knowing the tragedy might have been prevented. The question now was whether the system, beyond just Oluwase, would face scrutiny for its failures. Katrina's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It exposed deep flaws in the system meant to protect her. Her family, devastated by their loss, demanded answers. Why had the Metropolitan Police ignored Katrina's repeated calls for help? The Independent Office for Police Conduct launched an investigation in 2018 to examine the force's handling of her 5 complaints between February and June. What they uncovered was a cascade of missed opportunities and procedural failures that left Katrina vulnerable. The Independent Office for Police Conduct found that officers had failed to follow basic protocols. Each of Katrina's reports, detailing threats, physical altercations, and Oluwase's controlling behavior, should have triggered a DASH risk assessment, a tool designed to identify high-risk cases of domestic abuse. But in Katrina's case, these assessments were either skipped or superficial. 12 officers faced scrutiny, with 2, PCs Sophie Dennis and Carrie Linham, facing disciplinary hearings in September 2020. Sophie admitted to falsifying a report after one of Katrina's complaints, claiming she'd followed up when she hadn't. She also neglected to complete a risk assessment after the June 26th incident, when Oluwase poured a drink over Katrina in public. Carrie, who handled another of Katrina's reports, partially acknowledged her failure to escalate the case properly. Both officers received formal sanctions, but for Katrina's family, it felt like too little, too late. In September 2021, a coroner's inquest at South London Coroner's Court delivered a scathing verdict. Coroner Andrew Harris ruled Katrina's death an unlawful killing, emphasizing that the police's inadequate response contributed to the tragedy. The coroner noted that the police knew Oluwaseyi's history but didn't act on it, leaving Katrina exposed to escalating danger. The Metropolitan Police issued a public apology, admitting their shortcomings. They promised better training for officers and improved systems for handling domestic abuse cases, including a pilot program for dedicated domestic abuse response teams. By January 2019, the legal system turned its focus to Oluwaseyi Dada. On January 9th, he stood in Southwark Crown Court and pleaded guilty to manslaughter, acknowledging his role in the physical struggle that led to Katrina Makanova's death on July 12, 2018. The prosecution laid out the details: a heated argument, a physical scuffle, and a tragic fall onto a knife in Katrina's handbag. The defense argued that Oluwaseyi hadn't intended harm, and forensic evidence confirmed the knife was Katrina's, with no proof he used it against her. The case was a legal gray area, balancing responsibility with the absence of intent. On January 29, 2019, Judge Nicholas Lorraine Smith sentenced Oluwaseyi to 2 years and 3 months in prison. The courtroom was tense as Katrina's family heard the verdict. Her brother Julius, sitting in the gallery, felt the sentence was a betrayal, a mere 2 years for a life lost. He later told reporters it was a mockery of justice, a sentiment echoed by relatives who felt the punishment didn't match the loss. The judge explained that the sentence reflected the extraordinary nature of the case. The knife belonged to Katrina, and the incident was deemed an accident during a mutual struggle. Legal guidelines for manslaughter, he said, limited the penalty. Harriet Harman, the family's MP, wrote to the Solicitor General, Robert Buckland, calling the sentence unduly lenient. The family filed an appeal in March 2019, hoping for a harsher penalty. Buckland reviewed the case but upheld the sentence, stating it aligned with sentencing guidelines for manslaughter without intent. He acknowledged the family's pain, but insisted the court's hands were tied by the evidence. But even as the case closed, Oluwaseyi's story took another dark turn. After serving his sentence, he was released in 2020, but his freedom was short-lived. On May 20, 2022, he attacked another woman, Lisa Kubios, in Hounslow, West London, grabbing her by the neck and striking her face with moped keys, causing a severe wound above her eye. On July 8, 2022, at Kingston Crown Court, he was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months for grievous bodily harm, along with a 10-year restraining order, returning him to prison and highlighting his persistent pattern of abusive behavior. The second part of our video is dedicated to the case of Sophie Kavanagh. She was a 31-year-old mother of 2, known for her warmth and devotion to her kids. But in May 2018, her life was cut short in a way that shocked her family and community. What started as a day out with her estranged husband ended in tragedy, marked by a chilling message left behind. How did a woman so full of love end up under a duvet in a Bromley flat? And what drove the man she once trusted to betray her? Let's piece together Sophie's story, starting with a romance that promised forever but delivered pain. Sophie Kavanagh met Martin Kavanagh in 2008 at a pub in Elmer's End, Bromley. She was 24, vibrant, and quick to smile, according to her half-sister, Lucy Larkin. Martin, then 28, was charming, and their connection sparked instantly. By 2011, they were married, building a life together in southeast London. For a while, it seemed like a love story, headed for a happy ending. They welcomed 2 children, and Sophie poured her heart into being a mother, doting on her kids with a warmth her family said made her an angel. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Martin's behavior grew controlling. He was jealous, possessive, and quick to anger. traits that became more pronounced over time. By December 2016, Sophie had had enough. She left Martin, ending their marriage but not their contact. They stayed connected for their children, often meeting up for family outings. Sophie tried to move on, even exploring new relationships, but Martin couldn't let go. He'd text her new partners, intimidating them, or bombard Sophie with messages, like one pleading, "I want to have you one last final time." Her sister noticed Sophie seemed down, depressed even, weighed down by Martin's relentless hold. On May 19, 2018, Sophie and Martin spent the day together in a way that seemed almost normal. They took their 2 children to Wingham Wildlife Park in Kent, a family-friendly spot where they could watch animals and share a few hours as co-parents. To outsiders, it looked like an effort to keep things civil for their kids' sake. Afterward, they headed to the Chatterton Arms, a pub in Bromley Common, to meet friends. It was around 5:30 p.m., and the group chatted over drinks, the mood light, at least on the surface. But beneath it, tensions simmered. Sophie's phone records later revealed she was active online that evening, browsing and texting until just after midnight. Martin, meanwhile, was fixated on her. Days earlier, he'd offered her £100 to sleep with him one last time, an offer she firmly rejected, according to a friend she confided in. That night, they ended up at Martin's flat on Chatterton Road, a place he'd been renting for just 2 months. Sophie didn't live there, and her mother, Dawn Larkin, later said she hadn't known Sophie was going to the flat. What happened in those late hours is unclear, but prosecutors later argued it was tied to Martin's jealousy. He'd sent texts accusing Sophie of rubbing salt into his wounds by seeing other men, his obsession growing. Sometime between late Saturday night and early Sunday morning, May 20th, the situation turned deadly. Martin, consumed by his need to control Sophie, strangled her. The exact sequence, whether it was a sudden act or a prolonged confrontation, wasn't detailed in court, but the outcome was final. Sophie's life ended in that flat, her body left under a duvet in the bedroom. Martin didn't stay. He took their children to his mother's house in Beckenham around 8:10 a.m., asking her to watch them for a couple of hours. He was agitated, shouting to be let in, and left without explaining where he was going. On May 20th, 2018, at 6:13 p.m., the London Ambulance Service called police to a flat on Chatterton Road in Bromley after reports of a woman found dead. Officers arrived to find Sophie, lifeless under a duvet in a bedroom. Her body was naked, her damaged mobile phone discarded in a kitchen bin next to a pair of scissors, suggesting someone had tried to destroy it. The scene was quiet but eerie, with forensic teams soon combing for clues. What caught their attention was a children's whiteboard propped in the corner of the room. Scrawled on it was a message from Martin. She deserved it. And now me, my angel and my princess can be together forever, and we will have love and happiness like we deserve. The message was chilling, a mix of love, blame, and justification. It pointed to Martin's state of mind, jealous, possessive, and unrepentant. A post-mortem examination conducted on May 22nd revealed a provisional cause of death, compression of the neck. Sophie had been strangled, and the Metropolitan Police's Homicide and Major Crime Command, led by Detective Chief Inspector Richard Vandenberg, launched a murder investigation. Initially treated as unexplained, the death was now deemed suspicious, and Martin Kavanagh, Sophie's estranged husband, became the prime suspect. He'd vanished after dropping off their children, prompting a public appeal on May 23rd to find him. Police warned he had links to Southeast London and the South Coast, including Paynton, and urged the public not to approach him. Martin's Audi was seized for examination, and neighbors reported he'd only lived in the flat for 2 months. Edward Basting, a neighbor, described him as quiet, saying they'd only exchanged hellos. By May 24th, Martin walked into Bromley Police Station, turning himself in. He was arrested with Sophie's bank cards in his possession and a fresh injury to his forearm, possibly from climbing over something to flee. The evidence was mounting, but the whiteboard's words lingered, a haunting clue to what drove him. Sophie Kavanaugh's murder wasn't just a personal tragedy, it raised questions about whether the system could have done more to protect her. Unlike some cases where victims repeatedly reported abuse, there's no public record of Sophie contacting police about Martin's behavior before her death. But her family and friends knew he was controlling, a trait that persisted after their 2016 separation. Lucy Larkin, Sophie's half-sister, told the Old Bailey that Martin would sabotage Sophie's attempts at new relationships, texting her partners and making her life hell. This pattern of jealousy and control was a red flag, yet it never reached the authorities in a formal complaint. Martin Kavanaugh's trial began at the Old Bailey in November 2018, 6 months after Sophie's death. On December 7th, after a 4-hour deliberation, the jury found him guilty of murder. The evidence was damning. The whiteboard message, Sophie's damaged phone, and the post-mortem confirming strangulation. Prosecutor Alexandra Healy painted Martin as controlling, jealous, and possessive, citing texts like one accusing Sophie of seeing other men. Martin claimed self-defense, alleging Sophie attacked him after they took cocaine, and he grabbed her neck for 10, 15, or maybe 20 seconds. The jury rejected his story, and Sophie's family wept as the verdict was read. On December 10th, Martin was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. The judge described the act as a culmination of his obsessive control, noting the whiteboard message as evidence of his mindset. Sophie's mother, Dawn, spoke of her daughter's love for her children, calling her an angel who was taken too soon. The family was heartbroken, but relieved by the conviction. Sophie Kavanaugh's story is a stark reminder of how love can turn lethal. A 31-year-old mother who lived for her children, she was betrayed by the man she once loved. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.